The concept of engagement itself, we know what it creates, we know what to do to stimulate it, but what is engagement? It's almost an emotion. My name is Antoine Devinat. I'm an industrial psychologist, and the name of my firm is ADN Leadership. And I basically work with large, medium, small companies in different HR issues that they may have. Yes. Well, it should. Not all organizations are refocusing their hiring practices that way, but I do believe it should. Vocational interests, we used to look at that solely when you're 16 or 17 to think about, okay, what could be your potential job or types of role or responsibilities you could have in your life, and it was there by vocational counselors. They were there to help students get a better understanding of what are the options and what kind of studies they should do to go in a direction that would please them, that they would find it interesting. But it's as if vocationalist interest analysis stopped at 17 years old, which makes no sense, because in a way, studies have shown that the quality of the information you get from the tools that we use to measure it isn't that great when you're 17. In fact, it becomes a better predictor of the type of work that you will really love when you're 25, 26, or 27 years old. So that's why we're looking back at using some of these tools within the hiring practices. Problem is, these types of tools right now weren't made to be used through hiring processes. They were built to use in a context where it's not as if I'm looking for a job. I'm thinking about what I would like or what my likes or dislikes are. So it's a different mindset. When you're in a hiring process, you may have a tendency to tweak some of the data or some of your responses so that it better fits what you think the employer wants to hear. And so we have to find a way to measure vocational interest, and maybe differently, to be able to use that information within a hiring process. But some are exploring that more and more, sometimes through different types of interview questions that are really focusing on these vocational interests than we did before. So we're starting to adjust some of the hiring or testing practices with that data in mind. Employee engagement. There are lots of models that have theorized on what employee engagement is. So the one that I use was built by two professors at HEC and UQAM. And in their model, it's Simard et Tremblay, and in their model they've identified, I believe it was 5 or 6 levers or angles that an organization can focus on that will stimulate engagement. So it's as if we don't exactly, the feeling of engagement, the concept of engagement itself, we know what it creates, we know what to do to stimulate it, but what is engagement? It's almost an emotion. It's a feeling of being attached, kind of a feeling of attachment to something. And that's why when when you're in the process of eventually marrying someone, you'll say we're engaged. Right, so it's the same expression that you can use, but you're not engaged to a company. But it's a similar type of emotion that someone will feel towards an organization that they work with. What are they engaged to? That's also a complex issue because are they engaged to the organization? Are they engaged to their boss? Are they engaged to the team? Or they're engaged to the work that they do? To their customers, for example. It's maybe all of that or just one. There are some models that are working on that, but it's not clear exactly because we're talking about an emotion. However, we know that there are things that an organization can do to stimulate that level of engagement. Things like create more opportunities for autonomy. And what's interesting on that specific angle is that everything that has happened through COVID, micromanagers went ballistic when their employees started to work from home because they were thinking they won't be working, they're going to steal time, we won't be able to perform. And in fact, it's the total opposite that happened. We observed that on average, most organizations became more performant. Their performance level went up from 10 to 15%. And so micromanagers had a lot of difficulty adapting, but managers who are using strategies that are based on trust-based management strategies had great results with their employees. And COVID, in a certain way, helped the autonomy side. So that's one thing that you can work on and focus on to stimulate levels of engagement from your employees. Another one is obviously support. When I need some help, when sometimes things are not happening, I'm having trouble getting collaboration from another team, another unit of the organization. Is my boss there to help me, or is there someone else that can help me fix this situation that I can proceed and perform the way that I want to? So support is also very important. There's the concept of justice. Now, justice doesn't necessarily mean everybody's treated the same, but it means everybody's treated fairly. So the concept of fairness will focus on things like, for example, we both of us may work 5 days a week, but you've done some overtime Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday because we had a rush on something that we need to deliver Thursday. I didn't. You did. So if the boss offers you, if our boss offers you a Friday afternoon off and I don't get it, well, it's fair. Now, some people have a sense of justice. If you get something, I should get the same thing. But that's not the idea of fairness. The problem is we don't have the same definition of what fair is. So an organization needs to have that conversation with their employees regularly so that we have a common understanding what fairness means, so that basically justice is perceived the same way. But the concept of justice is an important angle. Yes, there's the financial part of it too. Same work, same job, same type of salary. But it's not just the money part. So there's fairness, there's autonomy, there's support, there's recognition. There are many strategies that organizations are getting better at offering recognition. Managers that kept saying good job, it doesn't mean anything. It's good job doesn't work. It works like 5 seconds. It's like a dog. You give him a sugar, he's happy for 5 seconds. Good job has the same effect. It doesn't work at all. The more specific you need, good job, because when you did that, it generated that positive outcome with our clients or with another team. That's a more specific recognition. There's a time frame that's important. So if you do something well, you know how sometimes you see an employee that does something well, but you wait a week or 2 or 3 before mentioning it. That's too bad for you, but you've lost your impact. In fact, even though we're not animals, an animal, a dog, you need to be very quick. If he does something wrong or right, the reaction needs to be quick. Usually in humans, 24 to 48 hours is we see the effect of recognition goes down. So all these programs that offer you something like at the end of the year because you accomplished something or you did something in particular during a semester or quarter or whatever, doesn't work really well because the brain doesn't associate the recognition to the actual behavior that you're being recognized on. So recognition is important, but there are ways to recognize that are more efficient than others. But there's a new one that they added to their model. It's pride. And in their initial model, pride wasn't there, but they added it further down the road because they realized the more proud you feel of working for an organization, the more engaged you are. But it's still, for me, that one is still iffy because what's really the difference between pride and being engaged? It seems to me that there's certain similar emotions that are happening in between these two. But working on pride, being proud of working for a team or accomplishing something, using that type of word when you're trying to engage your team may also have a very positive impact. But so these are different types of ways that you can potentially stimulate the level of engagement that your employee may feel. And the more engaged they are, again, performance goes up, customer satisfaction is stronger, there's a lower level of absenteeism, retention levels go up. So there are a lot of positive outcomes on focusing on any types of levers that you can find that will stimulate employee levels of engagement. Well, the first thing many organizations are doing better and better is asking themselves the question, what are we all about? What is Desjardins all about? What is Banque Nationale all about? What is Ubisoft all about? And it brings us back a bit, I think, to the idea of when I was talking about employee branding, but I think it's much more than that. It's really when you work here, what is the type of experience we want our employees to have? And that is a very, I believe it's a fundamental question that an organization needs to ask itself because it has an impact on everything. on how we manage people, how we develop people, how we hire people, how we support our employees, how we reward our employees. If you ask yourself that question, what are we all about? I believe that's the starting block of whatever needs to come next. If you take the time to really ask yourself that question, define it, and make sure that all of your business practices, HR practices, operation practices are coherent with what you want to be all about, then selling your product becomes easier and easier. It's like anything. It's like selling. It's like I believe it's similar to marketing. In marketing, sometimes I'm not a pro in marketing, obviously, but I would imagine that when you have a product, you ask yourself, what is the type of experience I want my customer to have with that product? And that will influence significantly how you're going to sell it. I believe that organizations are becoming more and more like a product, and they really need to market what they're all about. And making sure that their internal practices are coherent with that. And so, ergo, they will attract the right individuals. And people now are looking at organizations. There's a certain part of feeling that's becoming more and more important. How appealing is that organization? How do I relate to what this organization is all about? That's one part of it. I do observe, sadly, however, that a lot of individuals, potential employees, aren't even asking themselves that question, aren't thinking about what is the type of organization that you would feel good in. So when I do a lot of I do a lot of career transition from time to time, and I find it appalling that I would ask someone a question like that and they would have no answer. But it is the case. So I think organizations need to work on their end. But I do believe that on a more individual level, we need to ask ourselves these types of questions more frequently. I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was coaching an executive leader. And I just asked him that question. I asked him 2 questions. First, why do you work in this organization? And why do you love what you do? Beep. No answer. The only answer he gave me was salary, which we know has its limits. Power, again, has its limits. And the fact that he would have a great retirement plan. Okay. I'm not sure focusing just on these 3 things creates the best harmonious and stimulating and engaging type of organization. And imagine a leader like that, how he manages his employees. I didn't want to go there. I haven't gone there yet, but I'm scared of what I'm going to discover. I'll do my best to answer that question. I do believe we need to consider what type of position we're hiring to answer that question. Because I do believe there may be 2 or 3 typical, maybe even more, so maybe 4 types of context that one needs to consider. Because context number 1, mass hiring, is very different from expertise hiring. So if I'm building a plant and a production plant, and I need to have 600 employees that are operators, machine operators, it's systematic. It's almost 500 or 600 individuals that basically have the same type of profile. The strategy you'll be using there will be very, very different than hiring an individual that has a crazy, very specific type of expertise that you find in 1 in a million. Or if you're hiring a manager, or if you're hiring an executive leader, again, your hiring practices need to be different. Now, if I separate these types of contexts and think about them individually, what are potential best practices? Well, obviously, what I was referring to in terms of what is the organization all about? What will you and how do you become appealing to potential employees? And looking at what companies are doing in terms of marketing themselves, I see more and more ads, billboards, radio ads for hire. I believe there's not much more than that you can do, and it works fairly well, but still, there is the problem that I was talking about earlier. We need more people. Just in terms of numbers, there's a problem about the amount of people that are in fact available to work. So even though I think they're doing things right, I'm not sure the resources are there anyways. What I see in terms of hiring practices that are being tweaked and adjusted and are becoming a bit more efficient are, I would say, are more in the other types of categories of employees or roles or responsibilities that I was talking about. For example, there are often in organization positions for which these types of, they're called critical roles, not critical individuals, but critical roles. So these are roles where that finding someone to play that job is complex, and there are not 20 or 30,000 of them available in Canada. So more and more organizations are in fact hiring or proactively identifying potential resources. So they're building staffing HR practitioners or recruiters they need to become more and more strategic in how they're developing their own network of potential individuals that could maybe one day come to work for the organization. So that it's called strategic proactive recruitment practices. And I believe that approach makes a lot of sense. So that's one thing that's going on more and more, and I believe has shown that it's a very useful way to proceed. Obviously, more available for larger organizations than smaller ones. Smaller ones, what they'll usually do is they'll work with headhunters that specializes in these different areas of expertise, for example, in IT or in finance or these certain sectors where we know there's a certain level of expertise that's tough to find. But another thing that I find extremely interesting and that I see more and more, and I do believe that organizations should look into this more closely, is actually building a network of potential hirees that you're hiring not because of what they know, but basically just about on what their capabilities are. And we call them transversal competencies. So these are all abilities that we know are key for anyone. Qualities like adaptability, pure intelligence, emotional intelligence, a bit driven, naturally driven individuals who self-motivate more than others sometimes. Individuals who want to contribute to something bigger than themselves. Who are not individualistic in their approach. They want to be part of something. So imagine if you hire only people based on these characteristics. They could work in HR, they could work in finance, they can work in sales and marketing. It doesn't really matter. They have these fundamental qualities that have shown to be associated with strong potential. And it's interesting because 20 years ago, I was reading this book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's a classic in leadership. And he studied different characteristics that were key for a leader to demonstrate, to be able to bring an organization from good to great. And one of these characteristics, there were three. One of them is humility. As we all know, probably a lot of leaders in the organization today don't necessarily fit that characteristic, but it's a very important one. The second one is, does this person know exactly where they're going? What is the direction? What is the ultimate objective? I don't know how I'm going to get there, but that's the goal. But the third was, hire the best people possible and you'll find a way to get there. And personally, when I read that, I hated it. I did not agree with it at all, because for me, an organization should think about what they need, the type of profile, type of positions, and hire people accordingly. But that's not what he was saying. He was scrapping the whole concept of structure, of roles and responsibilities. He was just saying, hire people that have high potential and that have all these characteristics I was mentioning about. And it'll happen. In a way, everybody will find their place and everybody will contribute to the organization's success. It will happen. And I see organizations today starting to do that more and more. And I have to admit, maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I thought that was crazy. But it works. And I believe that today, when you're looking at the job market, when you're trying to hire someone to fit a role, what exactly are you saying to the person? You're saying, I'm picking you for a position. And when we think about some of the stuff we were talking about earlier about an employee or people's needs today to not consider themselves in a role, but more as a general contributor to the organization because they want to be able to move. If you hire someone on a different level and say, no, I'm not hiring you for a position. I'm hiring you because I believe that you can be an amazing contributor to the organization's success on a more general level. That's very appealing to younger players today, even more so, I think. So I think that shift that's happening, that specific one, in terms of not hiring someone for a position, but more about a certain number of characteristics that we know or contribute a lot to high potential, high delivery, high contribution, seems to work very well. And I do believe that large, medium, and small size organizations need to look into that more closely.